It looks like everyone's just in person.
Oh, great.
Let me double check. Yeah. Oops. I'm doing a how do I do that? Get rid of the transcript. Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And if you need to like adjust the volume, it's just these two things.
Those two. Okay. Amazing.
Have a good class.
Take care. Yeah. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Cara, you'll see me in a minute. I'm just behind the desk at the moment. But
Okay, no problem.
this is my very, very dear friend, Cara. I know you've heard her bio before, but I'm just going to, because we're recording this, and for people who can't attend, I'm going to read a short bio of hers, and then she will start talking to you about such brilliant things, literature, environment, climate crisis, consumerism, down with capitalism, amazing things. So Cara is a Sephardic professor of transdisciplinary ecological collaboration, has published dozens of books and articles on climate justice, art, gender and sexuality, and ethnic studies, including the critically acclaimed S.O.U.L Dreams, which we have read excerpts from, which he's going to talk about, which is brilliant, and Vicious Expectations, Justice, Vulnerability, and the Obscene.
Just like that's viscous expectations.
What did I say? How I did.
Yes, vicious, which a lot of people say, but it's about viscosity, and we're going to talk about that viscosity.
That is a key change. Then I'm so sorry. Thank you.
No, it's great. It happens all the time.
So yeah, her photographs and performance videos are in private and public collections as well. And her theoretical and visual work is the subject of documentaries for international public television. She was a former professor at Performance of Pedagogy at UC Santa Cruz, and she's program director for Jews of the Earth. And she teaches and performs and parents a creative, zero waste life. So she'll be talking about a lot of that today. So Cara, Ariel's in the lobby right now, so I'm going to let her in. So one student's in the lobby, just about to join. Elaine's joined too. So Elaine and Ariel, if you want to talk or contribute, you can use the chat function. Yeah, I'll let you take it away, Cara. Thank you so much, and so happy to have you here. You'll see my face.
Okay, thank you, Bryn. Yeah, it's so sweet to be working with you and your students. I cannot see me, so I don't know if I'm obviously visible to people.
Yes, perfectly.
Yes. Okay. And is it recording? What is it recording? Just so I know, because I'm in my home, my converted school bus, and I'll can give you a little tour. But I'd like to know, since I can't see what you're seeing.
Yeah. So we can see, the back. So we can see the school bus right now. We can see the bus and behind you, and yeah.
And is the recording going to record that and you, or is the recording just recording?
I think it's just recording you at the moment, and I think it's just on speaker view, so it'll just be you for sure.
Okay. All right. So thank you, everybody. I know that you don't have a chat, so if people will raise your hands, so I can get a little sense of who's in the room with me and who you are all together. If you could let me know what your name is, and maybe let's say 5 people. Your name, your ethnic background, where your family's from, and what source of energy do you use? And that's always a really interesting question, how people interpret that source of energy. Actually, we could just do popcorn style. If anyone wants to jump out, tell me your name, your ethnic background, your family's background, and your source of energy. Yeah, just jump out.
I think my name's Renee. My family's mainly from Germany, and I get my energy from socializing with other people.
Okay, great.
Anyone else want to share?
Yeah, my name is Vanessa. I'm from the Laurentians. My parents are French and English. And my main source of energy is coffee.
Coffee. Right, I get that one a lot. So it's when I first started asking this question about energy source, my intention was thinking about energy like what's illuminating your room. Like I would share that my energy sources are used solar panels, right, and used storage batteries, or from the micro hydroelectric sources in our eco-village. But I kept on getting coffee as a response from people. So again, a lot of your questions, and so I'm jumping ahead, but then we'll jump back. This is going to be very nonlinear. And again, that goes back to the viscosity issue. But a lot of what I'm asking you to explore is this personal political space. So the personal, so far with Renee and Vanessa, coffee, social, and then the political, more so looking at how we are actually illuminating our spaces, or how we're, how does the water come out of your faucets, assuming you all have access to running water. So it's that interplay that I'd like to focus on. So before we get into that more, I'm going to share the brief intersectional narrative with all of you. Children in my 4th grade class in Texas searched through my big curly hair looking for horns. The children in the school cafeteria would go into vomit, mimicking hysterics, because they saw my grape leaves and bagels as dog biscuits, and my colorful clothes and elaborate jewelry as gypsy-like and gaudy. My voice, gesture, opinions were too big, completely out of place. They encountered my Jewish otherness as danger and as a reflection of the abject. My mother and I were clearly displaced, seen as foreigners, trespassing on U.S. territory. This was my first embodied understanding of the relationship between the individual experience and the great whole, the vulnerability of my quote-unquote ethnic body, and the vulnerability of my natural environment, the public and the private, microcosmic interactions reflecting macrocosmic interconnections. I quickly learned both the extraordinary danger and vitality of difference, the lived intersection between cultural diversity and biodiversity. So I'd like you, we're going to do a little non-binary icebreaker and a thinking experiment, a corporeal thinking experiment. And I'd like for people to shout out various contradictions, supposedly opposing realities, contradictory realities, experiences, ideologies, frameworks that we are told is maybe intractable conflicts. So this is the sensory thought experiment that I'd like us to jump into. So go ahead. And I can give you some examples if you're not sure what I'm talking about. If you're not sure what I'm talking about ever, please tell me that too. Okay, I see some hands.
Lady. Could you give an example, please?
Yes. So one example, or I'll give 4 examples so you know what I'm talking about. So pro-choice, anti-abortion. That would be one example. Another would be vaccination mandate, informed consent. That would be second example. Third example would be Israel, Palestine. So like that, along those lines. So given your social, personal context, I'd love to know what are some intractable or seemingly intractable conflicts or opposing ideologies, realities, experiences. And then we're going to go through a sensory experiment with those. What are people's thoughts?
You guys could think about in terms of like climate crisis too. That was really an example of sort of intractable things. Also, yeah, it kind of makes me think, Cara, too, just like of William Blake's like contrary states of the human soul, like for like a more simplistic, like good and evil and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Seem like they're not, but in fact they're kind of necessary. So, but yeah, if you think about like the climate crisis, even I think that might give you a sense of these kind of things that seem like they might be intractable when in fact they actually can work together. But any thoughts on that? Yeah.
We were just exploring this in the class before this, but the argument that GMOs can solve food insecurity.
Oh, yeah.
And if there's just like one specific way to address food insecurity, but there isn't, that's a big argument that GMOs are
That's a really good example.
Right, that's beautiful. So let's see, how would we position that? GMO food security versus GMO toxicity. Emily, is that adequate?
There's like maybe other ways to address food insecurity in certain places. Like GMOs might not be the best solution. That's all I meant.
So what would be the binary that we're going to be confronting?
GMOs as the best solution versus looking at other solutions.
Okay. Great.
Exactly.
Best versus other. All right. So let's have four more.
Yeah, go ahead, Megan. I'm not sure, but maybe, well, that's something that I experienced, but like the opposition of like Western, like modern medicine versus natural healing and like
Great. So allopathic
yeah.
medicine versus complementary or natural healing. Great. Let's have a few more. Yeah, jump in.
Perhaps this is one in my head, but thinking realistically about the future, like climate crisis, considering the climate crisis, and then also being hopeful for the future.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
We read, have you read Parable of the Sower, Cara? We just read Octavia E. Butler's Parable of the Sower, and it's really kind of really brings in that kind of different type of thinking and how you need to be realistic, but then also if you're realistic, it's hard to be hopeful, and then just the confusion of that. So yeah, that's great. Thank you, Cara.
Right. And remembering, of course, that there are multiple forms of realism, right? We could be coming from are we coming from graphs and data and quote unquote, industry funded science, or are we coming from various indigenous perspectives that have a very different worldview, or is there a crossing over between those? But that's great. And how about one more?
I don't know if this counts, but like equality for all versus the wage gap, and like
what was the first thing you said?
Like equality for all, but there's still a huge wage gap.
Okay, let's see. So the binary would be capitalism. How would we? Let's see.
Well, it would be like just like how do you become equal in a capitalistic world?
Right. But yeah, we'll say equality versus capitalism. Even though many purport that capitalism leads to equality in a really perverse way, but does that seem?
Sure, I said I don't know if it's right or not.
No, okay, all right, no, that's great. Fantastic. Okay, so what I would like for all of you to do, if you're comfortable, if you'll go ahead and close your eyes and place one hand on your belly and one hand on your heart. And I'd like you to begin to sense into how your body responds as you listen to me. GMOs as the best solution. Other food insecurity solutions. Allopathic medicine, Western, modern, industry-funded allopathic medicine. Natural healing, complementary, earth-based healing. Realism, hard facts about climate crisis. Hope, courage. Equality, capitalism. So as I went through those, do you feel a hardening in your body? Does your pulse feel like it's accelerating or your temperature rising? Do you feel a constriction within the us, them, within that illusion of separation? Or is it possible for you to pause, to allow your breath to deepen, to invite in a sense of humility and a willingness to actively listen and be vulnerable? So just like for you to check in with yourself. Did you go into a defensive state? This is my view, this is not my view, the other view is wrong, whatever the other view is. And so we can come back to the room with our eyes open. I can't see if people's eyes are closed. This is all, as we know, peculiar in our techno euphoric environments. So I'm suggesting that we begin to play with the trickster. Have you been reading about the trickster in any of your literature spaces?
Some of them did. We read Son of a Trickster in my Gothic class, and then we've been talking about the trickster figure, and then we talked about, Prometheus by Carol of S.O.U.L too. So yeah, you guys talked in other classes too? Yeah, amazing. So yes.
And any initial for trickster people, shout out some of your associations with the trickster.
Transgressive,
yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thomas said mischievous.
Yes, yeah. What else? What other associations?
Funny? Yeah. So funny, like
playful. Yeah. All right, great. So I'm asking us to invoke. Oh, sorry. Would someone say something?
I think we're good. Got himself.
Yeah. So I'm asking us to invoke the trickster in the context of these supposed binaries, of these seemingly intractable conflicts, where we can begin to play with the both and the and, with contradiction and ambiguity, with the messiness between individual and social lived experiences. And I'm suggesting that trickster, that viscosity that Bryn mentioned before in relation to my book, Expectations, can become a bridge between our understanding, our exploration of literature in relation to the environment. So initially, I'd like to hear if people have a response to the idea of viscosity, of the trickster, of this in-between. What does it mean to be playful in this in-between space rather than adhering to our ideologies, adhering to what we think is right? Because as far as I'm concerned, that is one of the primary foundations of us versus them, of these false dichotomies, mind versus body, that perpetuates ethnocentrism, xenophobia, and clearly ecocide. So I'd love to hear from some of the students your thoughts on that. Does that resonate with you? Is it abstract?
Well, it's funny that you would say this because I feel like I've been struggling a lot with that lately in my own life, just putting people and experiences in boxes, just like as a way of categorizing my mind, which is just really harmful at the end of the day, I think, for myself and for other people, and it lacks level of empathy. But I also think that to exist in a world where everything is more ambiguous than it seems, or that I'd like it to be, it's a very vulnerable and continuously vulnerable experience. Like you're kind of existing in a realm of like unknown for a lot of the time.
Absolutely.
It's a very vulnerable experience to live in a world that is unknown to you, you know?
Yes.
So it's just, I think that's where I'm at, is like, you're just continuously in a vulnerable position, or at least it feels very.
Yes. So thank you so much. That really is really the key to what interlocks these different facets of my life. I think a lot of you noticed that my work is really disciplinary, and the way I raise my child, the way we live in our home, the way we try and model eco ethics is so deeply intersectional. And the foundation of that intersectionality is, I would say, vulnerability in so many ways. It's taking creative risks that really, in the end, can only be received if there's a community. They can only be productive, I'll say, and not productive in the capitalist sense, but productive in a generative and a regenerative sense. So what if we were to embrace that vulnerability? And another way I would say that is embody the trickster, where we would take a leap, both individually and collectively. I used to teach body awareness workshops, and one way I would define commitment in those workshops is jumping into the unknown. And what I've learned, particularly as a parent, is that we can't jump into the unknown by ourselves. We must do it in community. I have goosebumps because it's so phenomenally critical to be vulnerable, take those risks, but to seek out others in perhaps the most unexpected places. So this goes back to our sensory thought experiment. When we're constantly assuming that the only people we can work with are people with whom we're familiar, rather than someone so far outside of the realm of what we think there may be a connection with, when that person or that group of people may, in fact, there may be so much more fertility and so much more ability to listen and ability to be present than with those whom we would assume to be our allies and would assume to be our immediate community. So that's one initial suggestion I have is to take risks, to connect with people and with communities that really may surprise you, that may unnerve you, especially in the beginning, but to jump into that vulnerability. I'll show you a thing here. So this is, I don't know, since I can't see myself, I have no idea if this is in the frame or not. But this is the book, Viscous Expectations, that Bryn mentioned. Justice, vulnerability of the obscene. And it focuses on vulnerability of the body as a strategy for social justice, looking at the intersections among aesthetics, sexuality, and ethnicity, and looking at how social ecology and vulnerability are the foundations, or one of the foundations, the multiple overlaying foundations of this intersectionality. And vulnerability is key to that process. So when we're talking about how to feel empowered in the midst of the realism of the horrors of climate crisis, climate chaos, so much of that I so deeply believe is unpeeling what we think we know. And that really is an act of love, where we are willing to so deeply question and continually re-question, not looking for answers, but because in the process of questioning, we can learn so much. And it's that constellation of possibility that allows me to keep on going. With an 11-year-old who is struggling so much, he's half Black and half Middle Eastern, and we live in a predominantly white environment where video games and technology and taking for granted various forms of energy, various forms of consumerism, and where he's constantly confronted with having to straddle mainstream society and our values at home. And the only way that I can continue is by reminding myself that there are no answers necessarily, but there are connections, like the connection I've made with Brent, or the connection you make when you're not expecting it. It's being open. It's like, are you working with music at all in the context of literature, like avant-garde music and John Cage?
We haven't done that. We talk about music and the connection with music, but yeah, we haven't done that. Yeah.
Well, so again, looking at interdisciplinarity and intersectionality, and when we're trying so perhaps obsessively to solve one element, if we can try and turn around, go upside down, literally put your body in a handstand to try and figure out not the solution again, but to figure out what are the tendrils, what are the possible interconnecting nodes that can bring, again, this isn't about happiness or arrival, but kind of a satisfaction in the fact that we're alive, and the fact that we have incredibly sensory beings around us, our cellular mechanisms. And then I think that it really allows us to begin to have a sense of intimacy with objects. So, and with ourselves. That there's a phrase, cybopath. Is anyone familiar with that phrase? CIBO path. It's in a fantastic, it comes from a graphic novel, but it's in just a fantastic book called The Ecotopian Lexicon. Have any of you heard of that? It's an anthology. So cybopath, for me, is really a vision. It's kind of speculative fiction, but it's a vision for how we could possibly shift our evolutionary process. It refers to when you're biting, for example, into a banana, rather than just even feeling the sensory, the sensuality of a banana and the color, the texture, the taste, that kind of thing, where you actually go into the story of the banana, the political supply chain, the political embodied energy. So referring to how it was grown, pesticides used, the DDT that was banned in the US and is then imported to the global south and used to grow the bananas, and then they're imported back here. But where those sensory stories become part of our cellular cognition as we bite into the banana, where we cognitively sense the lives of the plantation workers, the people who were poisoned or whose families were poisoned by the DDTs, or the banana leaves that are being used for construction, or the palm fronds that are being used. Or another example, so this comes from, what is his name? Johnny Chu, actually. It's a really violent graphic novel. I could barely open it. But this idea is so thrilling. So again, unanticipated allies. He talks about biting into a hamburger. So where you sense, maybe even visually and certainly cellularly, you sense the CAFOs, the agribusiness, the feeding operations, massive battery farms where the cows are slaughtered. You sense that process. So the hamburger isn't just an anonymous object. So that's why I'm going into all of this, because when I pick up a pen and I just take it for granted that it's simply utilitarian, rather than having an intimate relationship with petroleum plastic that went into this object, where I can sense, and of course this is massively overwhelming, but it's also, I would say, massively empowering, because I'm not sleepwalking. I'm conscious, and I'm conscious that I have a choice. I don't have to buy a new pen. I mean, that's part of, in our home. Our home was constructed using all repurposed materials, including the solar panels, including the batteries. absolutely everything was found. So a lot of your questions are asking me, how do I function in normal society, with consumerism, with capitalism, and also how to convince other people. So I'd say one thing is model, like in your daily life, refuse to use anything new. Refuse to buy anything that is plastic, that's made in conditions where you don't know those conditions work. And we can assume, given the horrors of slave labor, of sweatshops and cheap labor, quote, across the world, that it didn't benefit the people who made those objects. So if you need something, first ask yourself, do I need this? And then, is it a desire? Is it a constructed desire? This new iPhone, for example, I've never owned a smartphone. I've never owned a credit card or a car. And because of those choices that have been really problematic in many situations, they've also led to, again, unexpected intimacies with other people in other communities. So firstly, asking yourself, do you need this? Is it a constructed desire? Is it part of manufactured consent and my compliance to be part of convenience culture? And can I get it used? There's so, God, with the internet, again, these back and forth exchanges, when the students asked me or made a comment about how paper literature uses, you're using trees and the horrors of the pulp mills and all of the poisons go into bleaching paper. But in fact, the hidden costs of what we're doing, what is now paperless in cyberspace is, from what I understand, so much more ecologically devastating because of the energy use that requires to maintain all the stores and databases in the cloud and et cetera, in the internet juggernaut, essentially. So the hidden costs, looking at these supply chains, the embodied energy, these layers, these imbricated interconnectivities that we are completely complicit in. This is not just pointing the finger at big oil, big gas, agribusiness, big pharmaceutical companies. This is about looking at our relationships, how we as consumers are complicit, are participating, and how can we creatively work together to find other ways. And this isn't about coming from a place of quote unquote privilege. It's about coming from a place of necessity. And that goes back to the issue of realism versus hope. And if we could play with the idea of courage, for example, with S.O.U.L, a bunch of you asked about the S.O.U.L, the eco-action model that I'm suggesting. That it's not a template, it's not a formula, it's more like a game, more like a trickster invitation for people in their very specific urban context and their specific economic context to play with, where we have the courage to go beyond, again, what we think we know, beyond what we think is the impossible. So I'm going to take a break there. Any thoughts about what I'm saying about the impossible? Are people feeling resistant, irritated?
Inspiring.
Yes, exactly. Inspiring. Exactly what Marianne said. I'm just, all of this, but I want students to talk. Do you have any comments so far that resonate with you, that give you hope, that you can sort of we've talked a lot too about how it sometimes feels hopeless because of the corporations and the extent of the climate crisis and how you sometimes feel paralyzed by all of that. So this feels hopeful to me. We're giving real acts that we can do to feel like we're able to contribute in some way. So I found that really useful. And also made me think, we've talked about the trickster and about sort of interdisciplinarity, but like the trickster figure. Do you think about it too, Kara? Just this idea of the changing identity, like they're always able to like change and conform and adapt. And so then that made me think of, we read Parable of the Sower, which is all about change and adaptability as well. And that's sort of what the religion for the main character is change and adaptability. So is that part of it too? Just that constant ability to like shift and and embody?
Yeah. So when you look at city commissions across the U.S., many of them, because it's trendy to talk about sustainability and to have a sustainability commission in your city government, many of those have resiliency or adaptation units. And so often what is being adapted to is how to adapt to a new norm of climate hell, rather than adapting to a new, possibly evolutionary trajectory, like what I'm suggesting with the psychopath. So our brains obviously are phenomenally complex, and we are not giving ourselves enough credit for empathy, our capacity for empathy, our capacity for taking on extraordinarily devastating realities, but without replicating.
Oh, we lost you for a bit, Clara.
Oh, here.
Yeah. You're still here, just
okay.
The camera sort of switched to a view of the bed or something.
Oh dear. Let's see.
There we go. Yeah, you're back.
Okay. There we go. There's my bed. Talk about intimacy. But let me see. Right, evolution. So epigenetics. If our courage, if our sense of resiliency and adaptation could be redirected towards how we can fully inhabit our potential neurologically, in terms, for example, of epigenetics, where biomimicry, are people familiar with biomimicry? Biomimicry, learning from nature, essentially. Oh, I saw a hand. I can't make eye contact. The person sitting next to Bryn, was that a hand? No.
Karina, I think people maybe were saying they understood. They did understand what it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So as you know, like with Zazu Dreams, with my cross-cultural climate justice book, that's about looking at examples, models of symbiosis in the natural world and cross-culturally and cross-time. And how can we begin to embrace very explicit realisms? I mean, that is also being realistic. When we look at the natural world, when we look at other cultures as models, as guides for where we stand now. And that does take courage, because it is moving us out of the familiar zone. And it's demanding that we reframe normal. So adaptation isn't just equality as assimilation, but it's equality as equilibrium. It's finding an equilibrium so that we can live in a way that isn't about my pleasure means your destruction, or my ease means your suffering. But seeing our web of kinship, and not just seeing it, but acting on it every day with the choices we're making. And this isn't about, 50 things that you can do to save the world or whatever. That's not what this is about. This is about a deep sense of integrity in how we see ourselves, how we choose to interact with other people in our immediate environment, and how that reflects on macrocosmic relationships, on global, since we're obviously in a hyper globalized entrenchment. So yeah, so I can say more about that, or if others have other thoughts they want to share.
I was wondering, do you sacrifice then? Do you think that's part of it too? Just recognizing that there's just some things that you just let go?
So thank you so much. That's a massive, massive issue. And one of the students asked about use the word sacrifice. I don't know if that student is there and wants to out. I'm not remembering what the question was, but it's related to sacrifice. I would say we're only sacrificing when we're positioning ourselves in relation to this norm, in relation to a static center, in relation to a hierarchical, patriarchal, Western industrial capitalist that is defining our needs to begin with. But if we're defining our needs in a very different framework, we're not sacrificing. We're experiencing joy, not because we're living simply, because even that is referring to the norm. It's referring to the center or what we are trying to supposedly achieve with equality. When in fact, this isn't about sacrifice. It's not about deprivation. It's, again, creative, collective risk-taking. And it's risk-taking because we are stepping out of that bubble of familiarity. But of course, when we're talking about challenging consumerism, that's really unsexy, right? That's not, people don't want to hear about not having, but it's not about not having. It's about being differently. It's like getting even out of the framework of property. I mean, so much of what we're talking about with, obviously with climate chaos, with human rights injustices, racial hygiene, all of that is about property, private property. And what if our understanding of need and want were not framed within that restriction or that assumption that this is mine? So then the issue of sacrifice, and this is so difficult, to even present the issue of sacrifice as a non-issue, like with a kid when you're a couple of you asked about parenting. It's extraordinarily challenging, but again, that's why we need to do this together. That's why I'm always reaching out to other parents. I'm always reaching out to other people who move from their place of their ethnic background. Like I was teaching at UC Santa Cruz, and my students would, some students wondered very aggressively, why are you always talking about being Jewish? About being Sephardic Jewish? Because I'm North African, Middle Eastern Jewish. I'm not Eastern European Jewish, and I'm often referring to that other Jew. I'm going to say other because it is so foundational to how I function in terms of how I teach pedagogy, how I teach gender, how I teach about ecological collaboration. And initially, there's resistance. Other people, wait, why are you talking about that? That's not related to that. And so I'm asking people, well, would you be willing to consider this other realm of analysis? Would you be willing to drop into your body for a second and just see how it feels? What if you were coming to a place of courage from your great-great-grandmothers, or from something intuitive inside of you that isn't just that quote-unquote experts and authorities don't justify, but in your heart that it's real, and in your heart that it motivates you to wake up in the morning and to feel, perhaps as a vitality.
Well, thank you, Carla. I have lots of questions, but yeah, you all came up with, I have a list of at least 14 here. Did any of you, would this be a good time for them to ask a question?
Yeah, please
Yeah,
jump in.
if you want to ask, no pressure, but there's some beauties here. If anyone wants to voice their question, I can always ask it. You guys, you have great questions.
Yeah, I've got your names. Should I call you out?
I know all of you. They're wonderful. Well, I was wondering, would you mind someone in this classroom asked a great question just about motherhood and bringing a child into the world when we sort of are in the face of such a climate disaster, and how you feel about that. And I guess maybe Do you mind answering that question? Sort of, was it something that you had to think about, and is it something you think about still, or?
Well, yeah, I guess so. That goes into the layers of courage. I was pregnant at 39, and I gave birth. It was an unassisted home birth with my son on my 40th birthday. And during that process of his gestation, of being, quote unquote, an older, I was in the danger zone, supposedly, according to medical experts. And then I was also teaching Iyengar yoga, prenatal yoga. So I was in relationship with so many women who were in this process of transformation, and that politicized me. Being in a situation where I needed to breastfeed my son, but because are so saturated with body phobia, right? The U.S. is maybe one of the most body phobic and sex saturated simultaneously societies in the entire world. And as a breastfeeding mother, you're caught right in the middle of that body phobia and sex obsession that dominates so much of our world, our daily world. So all of that inherently politicized me, where I was then involved with reproductive justice and doing sins that were always connecting with ecological issues. So the ecology of our body, was always the ecology of my son and our microbiomes as I breastfed him was always in relation to what's going on with ocean acidification and desertification, and how then does my breastfeeding relate to these issues which seem unbelievably overwhelming, and that could very easily lead to climate grief, right, and paralysis. This kind of a relentless anxiety that eats away at us because it feels like it's corporation and us. That's simply not the reality. We make our world, but it's the we.
Did you hear that they found arsenic in baby food? That was something that happened recently. Have you heard that?
No, in what kind of baby food?
I don't know what kind. I can't remember what kind.
You mean a commercial baby food?
Yeah.
Oh.
Not that would, but anyway, just made me think too, like just the necessity of opting out as well, and how that works. But
in relation to that, for those of you who may have looked into Zazu Dreams further, Nestle Corporation is one of the primary villains, and that is, I do put it in a binary in this case with the villain as that corporation. But Nestle, because of their relationship with formula, how they have stripped women across the world for decades of their capacity to breastfeed psychologically and physically, and replaced that innate power with product, with formula, and then looking at those relationships, Nestle's relationship to power, to privatizing water in California. So it's all of these interconnections. When we see how these oppressions are intermingled, we can see how our emancipation is also intermingled. And Nestle's a great example because they have their corporate fingers in so many aspects of people's lives across the world. So I'm curious, do people feel that this is relevant to their lives? And if so, maybe if it's difficult to articulate how, maybe shout out an adjective or a verb that feels, why is it relevant? And also, how does it relate to storytelling? You're telling a story, right? As I'm talking, you're telling a story in your brain. Oh, she's full of shit. Oh, she's coming from a place of privilege. Yeah, go ahead, Renee.
Well, so I hear all this stuff and it feels very hopeful, but it also feels really exhausting.
Yeah.
And so that's the adjective that comes, verb, I guess, that comes to mind is exhaustion. Like, I can't, like, it's a rewiring, and it's a constant rewiring. And it's like, it does feel like us versus them in that case, even though there is a lot of gray area between.
Yeah. It simply is exhausting. That's just the way it is. And if we create infrastructures, so that's why I offer S.O.U.L, and give examples of S.O.U.L that you can see on my site. But S.O.U.L is a way to replenish. It does take effort, but it simultaneously nourishes. It's just like you growing a garden. The garden takes a lot of work, right? To prepare the soil, to get the kinds of seeds that will grow in that soil. All of the water, your water access, all of that takes so much work, and you're growing a garden to feed yourself and your family and your community. So it's always the both and, I would say. As I try not to be absolutist, I'm going to say it's absolutely always the both and. And the idea of ambiguity, again, that if we can think of ambiguity not as a lack of clarity, but as a multiplicity of clarities. So returning again and again to the idea of diversity, of multiplicity, the relationship between cultural diversity and biodiversity. And these aren't just terms. They're like they're lived realities. They're lived choices. You get out of bed, how you get out of bed. Are you getting out of bed with an alarm from your iPhone? Or is it an app, a meditation app? And the complexities of having a meditation app on your phone that had tungsten that was mined in Central Africa. I mean, that these realities, it's all storytelling, it's all literature, And it's definitely exhausting and the simultaneity that I'm really curious about, and ask for you to be curious in your own ways if that's interesting to you.
So interesting. And then, simultaneity and then the multiplicity of being, that always brings me back to the trickster too, just embodying everything. And but also, do you see the childlike quality of the trickster as being important too? Because Zaza Dreams, again, is through the eyes of a child, and then it makes you more open, you see things more openly. So do you think that childlike quality, that was, I think Evelyn asked a bunch of really good questions, but the idea of the inner child being so important to the environmental movement. So I'm curious more about that.
Yeah. The idea, like in Zen, of beginner's mind, right? That we're coming from a place where we don't know the answers. And this goes back to the idea of love. I think so much of what hate is based on is a series of assumptions, compounding assumptions that feed into one another. The fear that we may not have it all together. Well, I would say love is more of a practice, not about answers. It's not about arrival, but it's an ongoing, co-evolving practice. And that is childlike. That doesn't mean that we don't have preferences and that we don't protect ourselves. But it does mean that there's, again, going back to vulnerability, there's a curiosity and a willingness.
Would you also be willing them to show them the bus and give them a little bit of?
Oh yeah, sure. Cool. So as I said, everything is repurposed. I have a fire going here. I can't. I don't know if it's in the picture, if it's in the frame or not. So we have our library here, and like the floor, for example, it was oak that people wanted a lighter color for their home, and they were going to strip out their entire hardwood floor I don't know how many trees were involved, and it was going to go to landfill, and so we were able to reclaim that, and that's what the floor is. That's what the insulation is. All of the insulation is found and used insulation. The refrigerator, the granite. Someone wanted a different color granite, and of course the granite is mined. And looking at all of those stories, it goes on. I don't know how much detail you want about the structure. Do people have particular questions about what it means to even live in a bus? Okay, I see a hand back there.
How long did it take to build?
We were actually building it in the winter in Michigan. So it took us 30 days initially because we were freezing. We had to have we used old billboards, like on the side of roads. I guess billboards don't even exist anymore because they're all electronic signs, but old billboards, which are massive petroplastic objects. And we were able to recoup billboards to put over the bus because we made skylights, if you can see. So as the snow was, accumulating around us in the Michigan winter, maybe similar to Montreal. But so we did it in 30 days. We did it as quickly as we could because we were so cold. And we made it very much an educational project for my son, a homeschool project. So we were dealing simultaneously with engineering and ethics, for example. And I have a lot of that background on my site where I'm talking about the Love Bus.
What would you say is some of the best parts about living there, and then do you find there are obviously challenges too, or have you just embraced it all?
Yeah. Well, two of the main challenges right now, our community is going through a land use code where they're now determining that tiny homes on wheels are illegal. So this goes into what I was talking about with it's not just housing discrimination and obviously mass economic discrimination, but people's idea of what is home, what is an adequate home. Like I said, every screw was put into this home with care, yet we're being told that we don't belong here because we don't live on a steel foundation, because we don't use a flush toilet. We're obviously off the grid. When in fact, for example, compost toilets are so much more hygienic than the sewage system, which is corrosive across the Western world. And we could get into that too if people are curious about humanure and those kinds of bioregenerative structures. But so that's one major challenge. The illusion that a $500,000 house is more viable than living in a tiny home. These kinds of very peculiar assumptions that are foundational to how people see themselves as worthwhile beings. And then another massive problem is a growing child in a bus who sees other ways of living that he is told, like I was saying before, are the right way of being, and that living in a school bus is somehow less than. It's just, and again, it's not about voluntary simplicity. It's about another way of a multitude ways of being without judgment. It's not a formula that I would ever suggest, but the possibility of trying something different that may positively affect our immediate, our micro and our macro worlds.
Yeah, it is. I admire you so much. You use courage so much, and it is you're so courageous. And I remember it's not the same as growing up in the country in a log house. Yeah. And we just heated it with a wood stove, and then going to school was weird food that my mom just got from the garden and that sort of thing, and just how culture kids just to, when you were talking about being made fun of, I would get made fun of for like having spit or something, which is very weird.
Yes.
And that's how, yeah, society just sort of, we have these ingrained things in our minds. This is wrong and this is this, and how hard that must be for you to navigate and seeing that other way of life. And so yeah, you are amazing.
Thank you. I mean, and again, what is it? What when we're defining radical? Because like even in the eco villages where we lived, my partner and I have been told, "Oh, you're too radical for this," and I felt, okay, well, this does feel like a middle class, like a glorified middle class suburbia. You have a solar array, you know, and that is incredibly problematic in and of itself. And you do live in small homes and you do grow your own food, but you're still rooted in privatized ideas of education, of transportation. But then the radical is only radical when you're positioning it next to some sort of illusion of neutrality.
So yeah, I love how you say about with sacrifice too, how it's not sacrifice, we have to rewire our brains and like shift how we actually think about it and what that actually is, when in fact getting something used instead can be liberating. And then I really love that. Do you have any other questions based on, I know there are some more of them, we have a bit more time with Cara. So is there anything, I know someone's really interested more in you talking more about petroleum parenting as well, how to avoid it, how to open people's minds to it. Would you mind saying more about that?
Yeah, so again, the idea of modeling, that this isn't about judging. I do not want to come across as self-righteous or arrogant, anything like that, because we're all struggling massively, and how can we struggle collaboratively? Is what I'm interested in. And again, with petroleum parenting. So petroleum parenting, I see as the way that parents, basically a kind of a cult of complicity with capitalism, that we're participating with our assumption that we need to depend on pharmaceuticals. We need to buy new things for our children so that they feel accepted in their social environments. That we need to transport them in cars. That there's so many elements of what it means to be a parent that immediately feeds into systems of oppression, interlocking systems of oppression. And then how do we confront that, both inside of ourselves and collaboratively with our children? And that is extraordinarily difficult, but again and again, to submit. So often I'm in conferences with other activists, and I often bring up the idea of parenting, and they say, well, that's where I need to back off a little bit, or that's where it's a safety issue. My kid has to have a phone. My 10-year-old has to have a phone as a safety issue. And I'm thinking, wow, we were just talking about race and farming, and you're now saying that your child has to have a phone for a safety issue, when that idea of safety is such a massive social construction that we need to unpack. We need to unravel. We cannot take for granted that idea of safety embedded in a technological device that is rooted in slave labor across the world. The way those elements are mined, the way they're transported, the EMFs on the child's body, so many layers. And then the relinquishing of empowerment that a child with a phone often has, because they can be tracked, by their parents. So there's so many, it's really problematic. But that's why, if people can ask questions without being judgmental and without feeling judged, it's really tricky. And that's where the trickster comes in, to maybe like twist us up a little bit and say, okay, are you willing to be uncomfortable? Are you willing to be exhausted to see if you can work out something where you can feel like you're living with integrity?
Yeah, I really love the exercise you did at the beginning. I felt a bit of like resistance when you did. So I heard capitalism, and then there's that kind of like resistance that comes up, and then and just having to learn to let go of your own biases too, and recognize that. Yeah, if you just being able to interact with someone with completely different views than you, what you said earlier too about like Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments, and David Hume talked about how yeah, we can only sympathize with people who are close to us and similar to us, and how we have to learn to sort of let go of that. Yes, I love what you're saying about that. Because the only way we're ever going to be able to deal with the crisis is if we, like you said, work together, different perspectives. Yeah.
And then that goes into things like, Google. I don't use Google as an example. Search engines that are based on cognitive bias, where you're only able to filter your research through what you already are familiar with. And what if we did start using encyclopedias again? I have this struggle with my son is attending a supposedly alternative school that is just so not, and part of it is that they don't use books. Luckily, they're only using computers for research projects. And it's the layers of complicity and the layers of, well, we can't change that because that's the way it is. I don't buy it, and I'm not going to buy it, and that is totally exhausting. But otherwise, there's no reason for me to wake up working. If I were just to say, oh, okay, right, there is no alternative, and even again, alternative, right? It's still referring to the center. It's still referring to the norm.
I love that about encyclopedia. My parents bought me an entire set of encyclopedias for like my 12th birthday, and I'm like, what the heck is this? But yeah, now I'm like, it's amazing. It's an amazing resource.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I guess I have to let these lovely people go really soon. Do you mind saying one more quick thing about Google though? Because I hadn't thought about that and the complicity and that. Do you mind saying a little more about it?
Yeah, well, just search engines. How often are we in a social situation and, oh, I can't remember that, and someone whips out their phone and they Google it, and it's just like, that's just even the assumption that people have a phone. I do have a phone. It's a flip phone, and that we need this immediate gratification, and we need to have a supposed landing point, again, a supposed arrival point. It's like, my son has his own bus, a mini bus. Again, it's all repurposed, and it's filled with books and toys, and that's an opportunity to take time. This idea of the slow movement, taking time. And I'm obviously a very fast person, but how do we take the pause? Like when we were doing the sensory experiment, can we pause before we go into reaction? The you're right, or the you're wrong, I'm right reaction. Where is that pause that we can find to maybe consider a possibility that is wholly unexpected?
Love it. Thank you so much, Cara. Before we give you a hand, do you have any other?
Yeah, okay.
It's Marianne.
I'm thinking when you talk about slow life and everything, you publish a lot of stuff, but you also live off grid. So how did you manage to live that slow life, but at the same time be part of the life?
Marianne, it's so challenging. I question myself every day about my own integrity. I battle with my son, and unfortunately it is battling around technology. And he says, well, wait a minute, you're on your computer. And I said, well, I'm on my computer because I'm a writer, and this is how I am functioning. So it's this utopic, driven world. I am participating, obviously, in a way that is very challenging, and I doubt myself at every turn with it. And I also feel like it's the exchange that at this point I am swallowing and not wrestling with it. Always wrestling with these these complexities. And again, going back to the idea that ambiguity is not a lack of clarity, but a multiplicity of clarities. And embodying that possibility, that failure, The Queer Art of Failure is a great book. The idea of failing, not just failing because we're not succeeding in capitalist terms, but failing because we are infinitely going to make mistakes. And that confusion itself is a state of grace. And how do we be in that? And always, again, it's that adaptability, maybe like Butler, like what you were just reading, it's that adaptability and that capacity for, okay, I'm going to shift here and see how I can work with this person. And maybe it will evolve into a remarkable beauty and a sense of joy, even as I'm tormented because, here we are on this machine right now. So it's a tough one. And again, it goes back to community.
Makes me think of Bo Lotto, that neuroscientist, and he writes about DVH. I might have told you about it. He was actually at the Zero Waste Conference 2 years ago, but yeah, he talks about embracing the perceptual power of doubt, which seems to work so well with what you're saying.
I love it.
Isn't it so nice? Yes, I'll send you his book. But any other questions before we let Cara go? I think we should give her a huge hand. Like, so inspiring. Also, one of my pens stopped working. I had to get a second pen during the show to feel like incredibly guilty. But yeah, thank you so much for being here.
And no guilt, right? This isn't about guilt.
It's the whole part.
It's about creatively looking at how we can function in the modern world and also find a sense of wholeness. Yeah. No, it's not about guilt. Thank you so much, Bryn. And if people want to reach out to me, I'm happy to be in dialogue and always looking for collaborators. One thing, in terms of representation, one student said that they found some of the way my website was constructed was challenging. And I'd love to speak to you, if you don't mind reaching out, about different ways of representing really complex, layered ideas that don't necessarily feed into our infrastructures of representation. So if the person who had that observation would reach out to me, I would really appreciate this, because I'd like to learn from you about other ways of sharing this information.
Oh, amazing. I'll get them too. And yeah, thank you again. Mwah. I love you.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.